I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the Mosaic of Wine Series 1. Giving my audience of wine lovers, students and professionals from across the world access to some of the most interesting, successful and influential people working in and around the world of wine. Series episodes explore the guest's backstory, covering their foundations, growth and legacy, using Interpreting Wine's Mosaic storytelling model. I would love this episode and this series to be the start of a conversation, so please make sure you're subscribed to Interpreting Wine podcast to be alerted when each series episode goes live. We continue the Mosaic of Wine series today in the company of Julian Gore-Booth, Executive Director of the Institute of Masters of Wine. We hear Julian's origin story, beginning off in the international humanitarian world, before discussing his time at Oddbins, and bringing us right up to date with the culture of wine excellence among Masters of Wine. We talk storytelling, with 2025 being the 70th anniversary of the Institute. We talk self-selection for those entering the MW program, and discuss options if the MW program isn't for you. We talk mentoring and former students of the MW program, opening the MW program out to new regions, before touching on Strategy 2030, growth and diversification, CPD for members, the Symposium, and media communication. Enjoy.
I think that I've been very lucky to have a very interesting career, but right from the beginning, with my family, in a way that I think a lot of people learn about wine. Mm-hmm. Wine was always at the dinner table. My father would explain why we were drinking what we were drinking, and I already found that fascinating, because it was geography, and it was history, and it was culture, and it was already a journey. And I think then, my journey then became very different. Actually, I've always been an internationalist, and so I then joined the international humanitarian world, and for many years I worked for the UN or the Red Cross, and moved into leadership roles with those organisations, and that's what in the end has brought me back to wine, and actually back to the Institute of Masters of Wine, because I went into working with professional membership associations, and my previous one was actually anesthesiologists, or anaesthetists as they're called in the UK, but anesthesiologists around much of the rest of the world, and they are specialist doctors. And so moving from a membership organisation of specialists to another international membership organisation of specialists was a logical move, but it's a move that it allowed me to come back to wine from those early days, as a student working in Oddbins, or writing about wine in my geography master's degree. It's always the love has always been there, and now I get to do it in my work as well, which is great.
Yeah, amazing. And interesting as well. Was the sort of exploration? Was it mainly, as you've already told us, sort of at the dinner table, or did in that time did you actually get to travel to any regions and get to explore? Kind of firsthand, did the start go that deep?
I did. No, I did a bit. I had an uncle who lived in Bordeaux, so we used to do a bit of exploring around there, and then I did as part of my master's degree. I did a paper on it was in Alsace, and I did a paper on comparing cooperative and private producers. I think Alsace being one of the really interesting regions for cooperatives, and so I didn't really know much about it at the time, and it gave me an excuse to go around many amazing producers in Alsace and taste an awful lot of their fabulous wines. So that was early days.
Yeah, amazing. And again, we'll piece all of these together as we kind of go through. But I'm just curious, have you sort of later in life have you revisited perhaps Alsace, or some of those earlier experiences, and seen them with completely different eyes, presumably now?
Well, there was an MW Master of Wine trip to Alsace recently, which unfortunately I wasn't able to go on. but it was an extremely successful trip, and they went down to the Jura as well. But I learned a lot just from talking to them and reading the reports from that trip.
Yeah.
I mean, funnily enough, I've also gone into my work with the Red Cross and the UN took me to Lebanon, and there I went and visited some of Lebanon's wineries, which currently might be quite topical, but it's been something where I can, I've tried to go back to it. But I think coming into this role, I'm discovering wine regions that I didn't even know existed. And that's part of the fascination for it. I think a key drive for me comes from my love of geography and maps and how the physical landscape is being used, and I find that I love that.
Okay, I love it. So let's transition, and people, I think is always one of those things that I think often is behind why we get into a specific topic, why we continue to kind of go deeper. But I think also in your case, culture also interests me as well. So you started to talk about the kind of diverse range of cultural influences. Really, I think traveling internationally with a diplomat father, learning French and Spanish as well. You've already mentioned the Alsace dissertation, sort of something you mentioned as well, kind of in our pre-call was the breakage Fridays while working at Oddbins. So I think this is really a great chance to sort of, I guess, go maybe a little bit deeper into some of those experiences. Again, at a high level or whatever sort of makes sense for you, and potentially then start to share, some of the learnings that you think have sort of made the most significant impact on your career to date.
Quick one for those of you listening who work with producer groups and wine regions. If you're struggling to break through the noise and communicate your unique story, what you might not know is that Interpreting Wine offers best-in-class marketing services to unlock your unique character and tell your story more effectively. In today's competitive wine storytelling landscape, we've developed a transformative 3-phase approach. Tell better stories, increase event engagement, and activate untapped audiences. Transforming how you connect with your target market and driving measurable business results. We've reached full capacity for client projects with no new engagements until 20th of January 2025. Lock in our 2024 prices before they rise in January. Head to interpretingwine.com/2025 prices, where you can read the full blog and join the waitlist before we close. Now, let's get back to the podcast.
Well, it's funny you should mention, so Breakage Fridays, that was Oddbins. So I think, like a lot of people, especially in the UK wine trade, there's a whole probably generation of people who've worked at Oddbins in one capacity or another. I had a very enlightened, I think brilliant manager who would say on a Friday afternoon, right, you've got £8 or whatever you had your budget, and you're eating fish, go and find a wine from California, or go and find a wine from South Africa or wherever it was. And so off you would go, and Oddbins was one of the first retailers that brought that geographical experience into the shop. So you were able to voyage around the world, and a lot of retailers now have followed that lead. I think you could voyage around the world in the shop. I just thought that was hugely exciting. And then you would, break the bottle in inverted commas, and then you would taste it, and the manager would explain to you why you had perhaps made not quite the right decision of what to have with your fish, or whatever it was that you were eating. And I think that was a great way to learn. And then since then, I think the real, for me, obviously, the real kind of the real launch or the real uptick in learning has come from being in this role, and I've only been in this role for 2 years, but being surrounded by people who are, not just passionate, sometimes almost sort of fanatical about wine, and whose knowledge is outstanding, and that's students and masters of wine. The knowledge of masters of wine is obviously, they've evidenced it to be exceptional. And just being with them, I remember being with my first seminar was where we work with the students, and we introduced them to the program, and we introduced them to the Master of Wine approach to tasting, and start that journey of helping them to work towards the exam and hopefully succeed in it. in the mornings, we're opening wine, and the masters of wine are checking the bottles for cork taint or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And I get to be in that room with them, and I'm just literally by osmosis learning what's going on, and I'm able to have that conversation of saying, what is this wine, and is it any good, and what's distinct about it, and what is special about it. And quite often the masters of wine, who are very generous with their time and knowledge, are just saying to me, well, what do you think, Julian? What do you think? And I go, well, I think it's really nice. And they'll go, well, why do you think it's nice? And what are you getting from it? And what aromas and what taste are you getting from this wine? And even as a real beginner, which I am, that's been very special.
Yeah. And a question really comes to mind from that, and it may not be the question that you're expecting, but I've had so many people mention Oddbins to me, and either through age or more likely than not, just because I wasn't into wine, first hand, it's really kind of passed me by, really. The kind of Oddbins experience, I wasn't able to work there, I wasn't really shopping there. So I'm just curious, really, because it feels as though they were quite radical.
Yes.
And I feel as though there are cultural learnings maybe from what they did. Be that either the innovation part that you've already mentioned there, where actually going to the geographical route was was something new, that somebody has to be first. But then it also potentially on the execution, the way that things like training, onboarding, things like, as you say, the breakage Fridays, just the, how does it look like on a sort of day to day? And I just wonder again, kind of again looking back on that experience, maybe again with more experience and through the lens that you've now got, are there sort of learnings that you think maybe we've forgotten from what Oddbins were able to do, and the impact that they, I believe, still have on the wine industry?
Yeah, I think they do. And I think if you look back to sort of the 1980s, so where were people buying their wine? So either you're at one end where you're buying your wine maybe from Berry Brothers, or you're buying your wine perhaps from Wine Society or something like that. But if you're just the average punter out on the street, where are you buying your wine? And that question sort of needed to be answered. And I think it was Oddbins who really came and provided the impetus for change, and led on to the whole idea of moving from the wine, the off license. So you would go to the off license, which was a predominantly miserable experience, and especially the wine part of it, particularly miserable experience. And Oddbins realised that, and they go, no, we're going to make this into a fabulous experience. And the wine warehouse, and those like Majestic who followed on from that, I think, is just it's brilliant, isn't it? And then you'll go and you'll know this is a fantastic experience, and you're on an odyssey. And you can go. I used to go with my dad. This is like father and son bonding stuff. And you're like, I'm in Spain. I'm in Italy. And you go around the world. And what could be more fun? And then now, you then also, they've taken that further, and you've got people there who are, pretty knowledgeable, working in the store or in the warehouse, and you can have a really good chat. And you can taste wine, and you can get engaged with it, and that's all happening in the retail experience. And I think even supermarkets, you'll see now where the supermarkets are starting to go, okay, we're going to separate wine off into a corner of the shop and try to create a distinct environment.
Absolutely, yeah.
Clever, and it works, and it means that you're going to spend a little bit longer, I think, on your decision making. And that's important, isn't? Well, we think that's important for your wine. Don't just go along and go, well, I'm completely driven only by price and by whether I like the label. But see if you can go a bit deeper than that. And retailers who've got that, I think, are going to be hopefully doing well. But they're certainly going to be getting a more engaged customer.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's again, really interesting to kind of revisit that, and I'll maybe sort of foreshadowing a little bit where I think the conversation is going to go. I think, as you well know, and lots of people will know that kind of follow me online. I do have views around maybe the the innovations that are there and the opportunities that are really there now for wine, because I do just wonder if maybe these things will go in cycles, don't they? And if maybe there's then another impetus, another sort of engagement lift that we kind of need to keep bringing new people in, to keep the category alive. And I believe it's something that we'll certainly touch on. I think when we talk about membership institutions, getting people to come in and study, and I think sort of pathways through education, I think that there are also then, if we follow it right the way back, there are these pathways into wine, aren't there? That I think we everyone from both sides, in the country of production, in the country of consumption, and everything in between, we always need, I think, to keep feeding those sort of pipelines, if we like.
Definitely, and I think especially with young people, and making sure that younger consumers are coming into and falling in love with wine. That's crucial.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll get there. We'll get there. all in good time. But I think, you've already hinted at the next area that I'd love us to sort of zone in on. And that's really your professional expertise, let's say, and professional experience. So, you've already, I think, given us a high-level view of some of those experiences. The Global Federation of Anesthesiologists, if I'm saying that correctly, and all of these, amazing-sounding international leadership roles as well. And I'd just ask you to kind of now reflect on your own experience, really, and just sort of bring in some of the specific skills from those experiences that you think are the most valuable, really, in your current position at the IMW, and how have you, I guess, adapted those skills to the wine world?
Well, fundamentally it's a love of and interest in people, and I think that from the early days in my international career, that's what really drove me. It's people, and people's situation and how they're managing in life and what they're doing. That's what really interests me. And so I used to be visiting refugee camps or hospitals in pretty dire situations. But at the end of the day, what interested me was people and their stories. And I think that that sort of combination of international experience and people and their stories is also what interests me about wine, and I hope makes me an enabler, and somebody who can be of value, even though I don't know about wine. I just love wine, but I don't know about wine. But from the perspective of being able to bring value to an international membership organisation, I think it's that ability to, on the one hand, understand how a professional membership organisation runs, and the complexities of an international organisation, the complexities of trying to grow an organisation, grow its relevance and impact, and the value that it brings to the world, combined with a love of the subject matter. And in this case, the subject matter is wine. I like to think, I don't know, but I like to think that I'm quite a good storyteller myself, and if that's true, I certainly love to engage with storytellers, and I think that wine's past, present, and very definitely its future has a lot to do with storytelling. And when you meet wine makers or wine families or the privileges that we have to talk to these kinds of people, that's where you understand the power of storytelling.
And a natural question, and it's probably something I can say it's a short question, but I'm sure not a long answer to really kind of work it out there. Again, be that looking at the institute itself, or maybe, of course, bringing in slightly more the rest of the, I guess, supply chain and the wine world. What are your thoughts on, I guess, starting with the institute, leveraging those stories? I mean, is it a question of leveraging the stories of the MWs themselves, and I guess the history of the institution, leveraging the place, leveraging the winemakers. Where do you kind of see that? Where do you see perhaps the key starting points and the building blocks of telling those stories?
Well, we're coming up to 70 years of the Institute of Masters of Wine next year. We're coming up to, and then after that it'll be 75 years since the first exam. So the first exam was 1953. The Institute was then founded in 1955. So there's already a sort of a solid history there. I think that it's really important, and I think that we can do more actually as an institute to encourage storytelling from the members, so from the Masters of Wine, and also actually from the students. So we have, at the moment there are 421 Masters of Wine, and there are about 350 this year active students, maybe a few less, but it's about that. And so the combined, I think, sort of knowledge, the combined expertise and sort of potential for fascination, but also promotion, and advocacy in a way that is gentle. It's by which I mean it's not sort of we're not a lobbying organisation, but what we are is an organisation of experts made up of Masters of Wine and then students who love and whose lives are shaped by and whose lives help to shape wine and the wine world and the wine industry. And so we must be getting out there and telling those stories. And it's also about, it's the human story. So when you go, okay, this wine region has just been hit by a terrible hailstorm, or this wine region has been hit by drought, or whatever it is, you need to get in there and get the human stories out of that. So you've got and then relate those to the livelihood stories and the stories of the economy and the culture of the area and the history of the area. How do they cope with these kinds of things? And I think Masters of Wine and Masters of Wine students can be very valuable in getting that kind of thing across and telling it from a human point of view.
Yeah, and I'm very much proud of all of the interviews that I've done across the years interpreting wine.
That's what you're doing.
Yeah, this is it, and I'm naturally, I think back to I think it was 2019. Now I did the first MW series, and actually, again, I think people knew by that point my style, my approach, and in every single interaction, in every single person that featured on that first series, and then beyond, because I've sort of kind of kept the door open really, and featured lots of MW since. I've always felt exactly what you just said there. I've always felt that people were putting forward that kind of soft advocacy. I didn't feel that a lot of people were generally not self-promoting, and it was almost I just sort of forced people to kind of give their email addresses or give their websites, and what is it that you do? What is it that you can offer? And I think that it's a great balance. I think again, based on the experience that I've had, it's been really balanced. Just balanced people and interesting people and engaging people that again I think are kind of working for the greater good. And I think and hopefully that this is a good medium for them to be able to share and kind of connect with the students and help them come through as well.
You've got a lot of characters in the wine world, that's for sure.
No, absolutely. And I think where I guide us to now, I mean, of course, all of these themes are, I think, ones that we'll sort of build on and we'll explore in further detail. But looking back, I think you've kind of transitioned from managing, I guess, physical risks in a lot of those humanitarian situations to really organizational and professional risks in the wine industry. Just invite you really to perhaps reflect on a significant challenge that you faced in either role or perhaps in the transition, kind of how you overcame it, and perhaps even again returning to that development of knowledge and coming into a new field and catching up in a sense.
Very, very much catching up. So I think for the Institute, I mean, golly, well, for so many organisations, and the impact of COVID was enormous. The impact of COVID on the Institute was huge. The Institute had to, completely change how it delivered the program over those two years. That had a big financial impact on the organisation. So we've been having to deal with that. But luckily, what we found is that people want to do the program. And that's our core raison d'être. That's what we're here for fundamentally. And it is great that the numbers of people applying and the numbers of people who want to embark on this really challenging program to aim to become a Master of Wine. Those numbers are very healthy. The interest is still there. So that wasn't taken away by COVID. So for me, I've been able to bring, if you like, my organisational and business skills and member organisation skills to the table. What I've had to learn about is, on the one hand, that the Institute of Masters of Wine is not without its complexity, both sort of internationally and in terms of what the membership wants. On the other hand, recovering from pretty difficult financial situation, and then of course understanding the subject matter. Not that I will ever understand the subject matter to the extent that the students of the Masters of Wine do, but trying to understand more about why are people doing the program, and what is in the program what is in the program for them, what is the point, and what is the value of being a student on the program, and what is the value of becoming a Master of Wine. And I need to, as the executive director, I obviously need to have a good understanding of those things. And that then drives, I think, a lot of the future evolution of the organisation, so that hopefully 1953 to 2053, you see a thriving, growing organisation that is valued by the wine world, and which gives value back. And I think that's a lot of what Masters of Wine are about. Yes, it helps your career. But fundamentally, what you're seeking to do, I think, is to deliver value to the wine world as a whole, because you're in love with it, and because you're an expert in it, and you're in it somewhere. Whether you're in it, we've talked about retail and so on. Whether you're in that part of it, buying, importing, retail, whether you're a critic or a judge or a writer or whatever it is, wherever you fit into the world, a winemaker, whether you're in the agricultural viticulture side of it, you will be a leader, you will be an expert, you will be an influencer, and the program will have given you additional network and tools to be able to do that. And I think I bring a lot of that does kind of come from my previous experience as well. We're a network, we're a qualification as well. But the point is the value you can then give back, and I think that's where Masters of Wine are, pretty special.
Yeah, it's. I love where the conversation is going, and something I've written down here, and I'd love to just really get your feedback on it. It's really a two-part question. So the two things that I've written down are your role as an institution, identifying and letting and allowing and facilitating people to realise that it's for them, that it's something that they want to do. But then I would imagine, and there's also a duty of care around allowing people to realise that it's not for them. That people should be, I think, encouraged to self-select. Yes. And I think the basis of that was a really, really interesting conversation that I had yesterday with a sommelier, Amber Gardner, who her episode will have gone out by the time yours goes out here, and we were talking about, and Amber, she shared her story of, again, as Steve Jobs said, you connect the dots looking back. But, she worked in Notria & Co. She went to Australia for Harvest. She came back and worked in fine dining. And, she sort of drove around Portugal, and then, now is living in the south of France. And we just really, spoke around, we spoke around really the I guess, options to a region or a producer. Say that, again, in the south of France, trying to get known and recognised in the UK. Of course, I think the perhaps more traditional route has been, let's kind of link arms with the Master of Wine, or let's sort of go through more traditional channels. But we were just talking around. Okay, Amber hasn't done the Master of Wine. I think it's something that was something that. But based on her experience, she would be a fantastic person to kind of complement a Master of Wine, or go a slightly different route potentially. So I think it's just that's a real example of there are other ways, aren't there? And I think just curious, is that an important thing for you? Do you think, to actually help people to see there are other routes, and kind of deciding for and against joining the institute or pursuing that route?
Yeah, definitely. So you've got to get something from either being on the program or getting to the end of it. So if Master of Wine is the holy grail for you, and you're driven by that, great. But for, I think, everyone on the program, you're also driven by being on the program itself and the value that you get from the journey. But it's really important that there is self-selection and also selection by us as part of that. So there are introductory courses. I'd encourage people to have a look online at our website and click on becoming an MW, because you start to get an understanding there of the enormous commitment that's required behind going through this journey, both in terms of the time it takes you, financial commitment of your family, huge commitment that's involved with being a student. And through our admissions process, at the moment, about 50% of the people who take the admissions exam or admissions test don't pass that. So there's a lot of people who are giving it a go, but it's important that we only take people onto the program who've got a real opportunity and a good, hopefully, a strong chance of actually being able to succeed on the program.
Yeah.
And then through the different stages of the program, because there's as there's 3 stages to the program: stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, which is the research paper. But stage 1 ends in an assessment, which is like it's a form of of exam, and that will some people will do that a couple of times and then realise, okay, maybe this is not for me, and then the same through to the exam and the research paper. So there are stages along the way, and you may decide, okay, I'm not going to make it to the end, but hopefully I will have got something from having spent time on the program. But I think it's important that we as an institute don't encourage people onto the program that it's not a fit for.
And again, I appreciate that you're one man and one institution, and you can't. But I guess it's more potentially, again, something that I'm hoping I might be able to share, might be able to help somebody out there who's listening. Just curious. What do you see as potentially the kind of support for somebody who either let's start at the start. Somebody who, I guess, maybe thinks the Institute of Master of Wine might be for them, and then perhaps realizes it isn't. It seems like, again, from the outside, that they're at the I've got friends who, as soon as they finish the diploma, it's like, oh, when are you doing the Master of Wine? Is there is this sort of gravitational pull, really, I think, along this sort of route. And again, it is quite a general question, but I'm just curious about, what sort of support are you seeing out there, or even actions people are sort of taking who, again, maybe realise, they're not going to study beyond the diploma. What are they sort of doing, and what do you think are some maybe useful approaches maybe that you've seen people take when they realise, okay, it's not Master of Wine, it's going to be something else, but maybe I don't know exactly what that looks like yet.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of that might be up to people's careers and the way their career is going, and if they're employed, who their employers are, what their employers are offering. With us, quite a lot of students are helped by their employer to do the Master of Wine program, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that wine education is now, hugely available. There's so much more wine education available than there used to be 20, 30 years ago. Certainly than there used to be when the Institute of Masters of Wine began. So the environment has changed enormously. You can go now and you can do what suits you. You can go and you can do an enormous amount of self-study online, and there are loads of places available where you can do that. And if you want it to be formalised, and you mentioned the WSET diploma, already a really difficult qualification to get. And that's an entry-level requirement for the Master of Wine program, either the diploma or something similar. It's I think some people suit the more formal approach and want to be examined, and might be good at being examined and want to evidence their excellence or their mastery in that way. And for some people, maybe that's not the most suitable thing. And you have. I think that's the point. Mastery can be achieved in different ways, and the path that suits you, will not be the same as it is for everybody else. I think the Master of Wine program is it's the pinnacle achievement. It's the pinnacle program in the world. But it's not the only one. You mentioned you were talking to a sommelier in previous edition, and I think that people would also need to look at something like that. Am I more service oriented? Am I more hospitality interested? Then maybe that's the route that I should choose. That the MW is a very broad syllabus, and you want to be sure that you're keen to take all of that on.
Which again, it sounds as though the primary way that you do that are those introductory sessions, but then also the exams as well, which I think it sounds as though they have to give a realistic preview of the course itself.
And you get a mentor. I mean, I think mentoring is hugely important, and mentoring happens within the program, but mentoring can happen in your career in wine in whatever route you choose. I find mentoring to be a really important part of what we do, and quite often it is. Quite often students, obviously they'll usually already know and be encouraged onto the program by current Masters of Wine, existing Masters of Wine, and that will quite often provide them with the, it's not just the professional and expert support, but also the emotional support to get through the demands of the program.
Yeah, absolutely, and it constantly comes up, around the support that families and spouses and kids, even that have given and provided. But I think really kind of close off this section around, I guess, challenges and hopefully to maybe even turn some of those challenges into opportunities. I found it interesting as well. You mentioned 421 active Masters of Wine, around 350 students, but then of course there will be. Looking at that picture, that there's almost a sort of a hidden figure, isn't there, around people who maybe have gotten to stage one and have kind of put the program on hold or have decided to leave the program. And I think, as we spoke about as well previously, I think as well, because I think you will naturally attract a sort of high performing type of individual, that there may even be sort of an element of shame around leaving the program, and in this perception, I'm putting air quotes because it's more than most people will ever do in their life, having failed the program, which absolutely isn't. It's again, you're at the base camp and on your way up Everest, to kind of really put it into perspective. So I guess it's really let's keep it up to date, and I'm just curious, what your current best thoughts around really how to make the most out of that, because again, those people have signalled their interest, their commitment. They won't reach that pinnacle, it's likely not, but that doesn't mean to say that they don't, of course, have a huge amount of experience and a lot to share with others within the industry.
I mean you're spot on, and so there's thousands of former students of the MW program, and I look upon that group of people as a resource and as a wider network, and almost all of them by definition are still working in and are hugely influential in the wine world, in the wine industry, and I think that my personal view is that the Institute has missed a bit of a trick here in terms of making sure that relationship, which for a few years, and students are on the program for between sort of 4 and 10 years, let's say. So there's quite a range, but that's a lot of time, and the relationship is really intense over that time. And it seems to me that to then go, okay, well, bye, is a shame, both for, in both directions. It's a real pity. So I am very interested, and I'm talking to the members about this as to what can we do to nurture that relationship and to keep that relationship with former students going, because they are, just because they didn't get through the exam or whatever it is, is the reason that they didn't become Master of Wine or they didn't get to stage 3 and pass the research paper. But they're still enormously valuable, and I certainly want to avoid any feelings of you use the word fail, and I would really kind of move strongly against that word, because what I want to do is to say no, people should be recognised and rewarded for what they did achieve and should be proud of it. We just said 50% of the people who apply to get on the programme don't get on the programme. I mean, you should already be proud if you get on the programme, and you should be celebrating that. And so, if you then progress further down the stages of the study program, you should be giving yourself a giant pat on the back. And I think that we as an institute should be doing more to celebrate that, reward that, recognise that achievement, and stay in touch with those people. And I'm exploring that with the membership and trying to see how we can do that. And hopefully you'll see that coming out in. We've just launched a strategy 2030, which alludes to this. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do that in the coming years.
Yeah, and I think it's as well, super meta, as I like to get sometimes. But we're sitting in the institution, we're sitting in London, we're sitting in the UK, where again, I think because of the historical associations, it's maybe more likely that you'll be around MWs, that you'll see MWs, and potentially it becomes more normalised. I always love reading the announcements, and it will be I think the one a few years ago was Italy's first Master of Wine, and then I think it really you think about a wine producing country like Italy with that kind of prominence, with that kind of heritage. And then you see, wow, again, let's reframe that Mount Everest and move it over to Italy, and we see, wow, so there are as well there. I'm sure there are lots of people who are on the mountain and climbing up there. And again, it's totally speculation, but I just wonder if it appears all the more incredible in somewhere like Italy, simply because there's only one person that's ever reached the peak, and maybe again here, maybe because we're at the heart of where the institution was founded, it's maybe slightly more normalised that we've got hundreds of MWs here.
Yeah. Well, so luckily for Gabriele Gorelli in Italy, Master Wine, there's now 3 or 4 there. But yeah, it's still like you look at that and you go, gosh, how can a wine producing country with the stature of Italy it not have more? So that's obviously partly down. It's down to the history and evolution of the institute, starting as a UK focused organisation, and only really in the 1980s beginning to move towards being more international, also addressing things like gender balance, which is now looking much better than it used to back in the 70s. So yeah, things have evolved, but I see a lot of opportunity in on the one hand in places like Italy, and making sure that we are communicating the value of the MW and of the process to the wine world in Italy, but also thinking about new markets and thinking about Asia, where we're really growing well, but I think we've got huge opportunity to do more. And then thinking about regions where it's quite hard to access the program. So, for example, I'm thinking about Latin America or South Africa. On the one hand, because it's pretty expensive to be able to access the program, and on the other hand, because they don't have access to the wines, the range, the breadth and the depth of wines that they need to be able to access. So somebody in the here we are in London. Somebody in London is going to be able to find pretty much everything that they need to find in terms of wines. But over in Argentina or Chile or Uruguay, you may not be able to do that. So how do we help with that? How do we knock down some of those barriers and make it more accessible for more people to be part of this? That really interests me as well.
Yeah, and I'm a great one for kind of closing in a future-oriented question and looking ahead. But you kind of beat me to it when you've already started talking there about strategy 2030 and almost again I like to get sort of meta. So again. Is it possible to say, really, I guess some of the themes that we've spoken about in this conversation, how many of those will kind of, come through into strategy 2030 and maybe even bringing in some of the other themes that we haven't covered in this conversation also?
Yeah, they will. So definitely, so growth and diversification is a key part in terms of the membership, the organisation as a whole. I think the other thing that members, are called for and are very keen to do, and which I think we'll be developing more of, is a more formal approach to CPD or continuous professional development, where I think we've got an opportunity to provide a more formal, structured platform and program for that to members, but also to non-members. I think in the future, so students and even to the public. I think it would be fascinating to get the public engaged more with the Institute. We already do that through, for example, the International Symposium. The last one was in Germany, and 2026 coming up in Adelaide in Australia, where the public can get involved. But I think there's opportunity there. I think there's demonstrably a huge gap between the diploma and the Master of Wine, and I'm keen to own that space. Or for the Institute to own that space, and that offers a lot of opportunity as well. And then it's sort of the markets. I think Asia, within Asia, because of the nature of the market in Asia, and the success of wine on the Asian market. To some extent, there is a bit more funding available there. There's more money available there to be able to do the program. Employers might be more likely to support it.
Yeah.
Scholarships and bursaries, or ways of supporting those from, let's say, South Africa or Latin America, helping to bridge that divide or knock down that barrier, build a bit more diversity. I think also important, but we need support to be able to do that. We've got a big supporter base actually, and we're hugely grateful for all of those who are part of that, because we simply wouldn't be able to actually provide the kind of quality and level of program that we do without them. But I'm keen to explore more of that, find ways for people to support us, for example, with more scholarships and bursaries, that kind of thing, so that we can. I'd love to look at a map. Coming back to my fascination with maps. I'd love to look at a map where we don't only have one Master of Wine in Latin America, and we've got a lot more than 3 or 4 in Italy, and we're starting to see that we are more representative of the wine world as a whole, with our own membership. That would be a good direction to go in.
Super interesting, and I think really, again, it's an element that we've spoken about here, and I'm just curious, is there a place in that strategy for storytelling, for communication? And, again, I'm sure it will underpin a lot of that, but how do you perhaps see that being expressed through that strategy?
Fun enough, the current chair has just become chair, Rod Smith, MW. He's a brilliant storyteller. I do think there's a real there's a place for storytelling within what we do. Going back to the beginning of when we started chatting. So I think that, fun enough, I'm definitely going to be exploring podcasts or other media. How do we get the stories across, and how do we engage more with not only our membership and the students, but also the wider world? And what is it that we can and should be doing to get those stories across? And whilst as a Master of Wine you're going to need to understand all the different taints that can affect a wine and chemical compositions and all sorts of facts and figures and numbers that are going to probably go over the heads of most of the population, including most of the population who are buying and drinking wine. So you've got to get to those people with stories. And I think when we then also circle back to where are the future consumers coming from, young people, and how do they get into wine, and how do young people access news, and how do they access stories, and they do it like this, and they do it on their phones, and we need to be part of that as well.
Yeah, okay. So really, as we wrap up, Julian, I'd really ask you, how can our listeners engage with the IMW? I mean, you've already mentioned several routes: joining the study program, attending the International Symposium, but I think also, you're keen to demonstrate openness to people supporting the work through various events and initiatives. And yeah, I just leave it open, and also ask you to mention how they can follow you and the IMW for the latest updates.
Brilliant. Well, if you're in the wine world, if you're already a wine professional, and you've been tickled a bit by this podcast, or your ears are burning in a good way, have a look at the website and have a look at becoming an MW, because that will certainly give some direction as to how you might engage with thinking about that, even before taking the plunge. For those that are also kind of already in the wine world, the International Symposium in Adelaide is a really good way to engage with us. That's November 2026. But we have other things going on. So just next week, for example, on the 5th of November, we'll be doing the Bordeaux tasting. So every year we taste through the left bank, right bank vintage from 3 years ago. If you can't get a space on this year, because that's probably already quite full, think about next year. Come and be part of that. Even for people who thought, I'll never do something like that. The opportunity to go along and around the left bank tasting through a vintage, and then along and around the right bank tasting through a vintage, it's fascinating. And you don't need to be an expert, I think, to really have fun and appreciate doing that. And for supporter organisations, please have a look at our supporter pages. So organisations that are in wine, have a look at our supporter pages on the website. And think about joining us to help us to keep the quality of our content at the pinnacle, which is where it is, and perhaps to make the programme more accessible to all those budding masters of wine around the world.
A huge thank you to today's guest, Julian Gore-Booth, Executive Director of the Institute of Masters of Wine. Visit mastersofwine.org, link below, where you can learn more and find their main social media handles. And why not reach out to the Institute to let them know what you thought of the episode and ask any questions raised. Next time on Interpreting Wine, Mosaic of Wine series, in episode 571, I'll be welcoming back Bree Stock, Master of Wine. Do subscribe to be alerted when that series episode goes live. See you then.